is a plan. This is a means. In other words, thank God that all the nuclear holding countries have recorded sickly distinctly against them a breaching method. It is the phenomenon of having been self-valued by all the nuclear holding countries through where and through how. Exploitations were made relevant to where and to how the founders of our modern countries were forced to defend themselves through fact treatment nature collusion slash S with where and with how countries A through Z were forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken, shocked, and all the worst, not realizing to syntax, to exploitations of where we are syntactically manifest. But now, as identities of voices, therefore, simultaneously two relevant ways, identity of the ground voices, the ground's voicings, voices, and relevant to where and how we have dominance over the Earth system as one tactical ulterior from the one that is positive to it and uses positive negative the way it uses to show the identity of solutions the way it does. Like, for example, each of the sciences has left out the special difference and the relevance of the other sciences. It means by logic that every individual group and species volume has distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously itself, hyper simultaneously itself, where and how the electrical engineering of the hypergenesis, if you will, and or the hypergeneration, if you won't, of that we know, which has been since before we were born, or anyone we know was born, to an extent. And we know to an extent to come after our physical lives. There is one identity of hyper-simultaneous per science that is an only increasing identity of volume and only increasing identity of relationship to itself, and is the value of that three ways functional, being how three ways, three distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible, three distinct identities of hyper correlation that are differentially increasingly also to be examined properly, relevant to Earth's special difference and to our own special difference, hyper additionally from it, and it hyper additionally from us. And we not each other, but we all also grouped we are. And it is one way unto itself where it is still temporary. And it is one way unto itself. We're, in other words, it is an identity of forever nature. Is one of the things constantly that the identity of the hypersimultaneous is, where it is things variably. This is also relevant to where and how special difference comes into play in consciousness. this hyper additional to that temporary positive as life, as this quality of diffusion we are, which we're and how we know the order of the finite. So we haven't had this explained to us properly because we have other words in its place. And they have theory used intersciences. No, this is the plan. This is also language about, this is also a lesson about, in other words, they have drills. In these systems, tactically ulterior, where they're using words like value, like identity, like ground, like in phrases, like even electrical engineering. I'm not an electrician. Don't I'm not an electrician. But there are means, and there are reasons why we have to rely on experts. Because if we don't know certain details, in other words, with electricity especially, you get hurt, killed. So it's important, to understand where and how expertise is used to get over on finite details. For example, so there are people that's part of the way they've been getting away with having the formal interpreters of what information is misinformation and what information is true information, and having all identity ground locations too already having been taken to collusions as all identities of sophistication / non-sophistication, and as we could examine with this, how manifest consciously were 15 identities of 15 identity ground identities of a relationship to themselves that are breaching that are hyper archetypal criminal enterprise discerned from before semi-ancient nations, countries, were taken to the uses of their own names as every individual. Otherwise, they're sending herds. Every individual country name, individually grouped and together. They were employed. They were hyper employed without anyone discerning the method or the motivations of it or the means by it. They were taken to defenses of self-valued roles with syntactical uses of how humanity was now bound individuals as names, grouped and together as voices of humanity. It's volume science. Now through these filtered, how we are relative into how we are individuals grouped and together, tactical ulterior from how we were by that volume science, not using any theories. This requires use of the discernment of that identity, of the value of that identity, of the discernment of that identity. For example, with being able to differentiate that and how being an individual, being grouped, and per its system though, and being the human volume science, three distinctly bound volume sciences. No, in plant life, animal life, and the species body. Cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall. More true. to remove theory. These are three distinct identities of relationship to itself. That identity of volume, everything is at once and grouped as itself and as individuals, apart, totally distinct from everything else. And so, as all parts individually grouped of and together of each person's body. Also, each identity of your body individually grouped and together as your body has a semi-nature relationship to this volume science that is itself as each part of everything that has been, that is now, and that is to come. See native drum. So each country wanted and needs to have a counter collusion as humanity. In other words, which is manifest, relevant where and how. In other words, so Baba Dieros, I'm going to put this in its own video because I don't know if you guys are going to do it. Otherwise, it would be, part of the syntax that can be owned by the countries that are already holding nuclear weapons. I'm going to show you guys how to cause positive value nature progressions, acts and natures and means out of nowhere. But it requires the discernment of how everyone individually grouped and together, and or they attach to the person to fake words, fake ties to other fake natures, ties, and how they get away with it. We'll address this. Forgiveness is needed because from off all locations, uses of the identity of value/value progression we are. Hyperditionally while as ground. Hyperditionally while as not just, its identity of volume, its identity of relationship to all parts of the body of space/existence are in demonstration of differential or special criticality and its conjunction such hyperconjunction as the hyperprogramming, as the syntactical, as that and how we are actually syntactically manifest and supposed to be using and aware of positive and negative treatments. So in other words, to be more positive, for a square, for the box to be an only increasing identity of volume, has to be positive to the circle as the circle. And the circle has to be positive as the shape, as the square. To be more and more of the circle that is also positive onto itself. For the system that is lasting, it uses the difference between temporary and lasting positive. There are proofs that with this, that there is, better than proofs. The beginning of the Quran and the beginning of the Old Testament, they were written with consciousness that all identity ground locations, voices, and identities were already in a trap that involved exploitation, for example. of the value/value progression, we are our locations, individually grouped and together. So in other words, we're going to examine how we are 1/3/5 identities of sequence/simultaneous nature, and where it appears that how we are bound three ways: finite order of the finite, order that is active, and the order that is progressive value. And the order that is, value has a relationship to positive and negative simultaneously because of how identity does. And we have a hypersyntactical possession of ourselves that was forbid free speech per a method that everyone missed. First, Native Americans against the Native Americans. And then further, when it became out in the books, everyone blaming others, other things, others ourselves, even when correctly, exactly the way the breaching method needed. When the stages of colonization and of our records keeping and relativity, denials and such like that. In other words, all identities of sophistication individually grouped and together, and / non-sophistication. They were all recorded, kept needing to hide lies and life progressions and finite details relevant, for example, and proper uses of the simultaneous by the mind, by and as the order of the mind, which is 5 distinct identities of sequence nature, invisible but still discernible, with hyperconjunction. But that is also 3 different identities of hyper invisible but still so discernible, so functional, also because of the identity of value that came before the order of all the finite now. Also has an identity of order. That is made through this while it is active, that which is individual finite parts of space / existence, grouped parts of space / existence, and altogether parts of space / existence, as 3 bound identities of volume relevant as the one identity, its identity of relationship to itself. And the only increasing value of that, relevant to where and to how it shows us that it demonstrates that it wants us to communicate and discern using science that and how it is only hyper additional to itself, where it appears to be plurality nature. It is 1/3/5 identities of relationship to ground, to and as its identity of relationship to ground the same way, but also distinctly and also grouped. And with discernment of this, it demonstrates per actually hyper honest science, I should say. In other words, that means to discern where and how all identities of sophistication / non-sophistication were are kept inclusion at corners of streets, relevant to where and to how collusions were are kept at corners of buildings, at all identities of locations. See, this was this was sustained. Where and how we are this value progression. We are this trinity per science, distinctly from the Trinity, as discerned, as used by the nature of religion /s too, because they use see people who don't discern their identity can't discern their identity relative to that which is hyper simultaneous, and its method by the order of the finite as that which can be used to demonstrate the simultaneous and the hyper simultaneous, and or the simultaneous hyper simultaneously can be used to discern finite details or the order of the finite being and having been denied. By logic, pretending passions and emotions know certain type of child abuse that everyone went through, per uses of it that everyone missed, preclusions that everyone was forced to self-value, and to blame on other things, others and or ourselves. Why? When, where, and how we are fact, human nature oriented and names oriented, forced commonly to use each other's names from off all locations influence /s. Note this being relevant to the part that was sustained. It took all identities of sophistication / non-sophistication, made those differences, employed them where and how we are syntactically. In other words, one of the things we could do is make a hyper dictionary, and to make an economic fund that will be owned only by you guys having a new voice, and like you guys will make a cartoon characters that will be represented by a certain rank, and if we catch that cartoon character, you can have your group think you had all think together, and I'm going to show you guys how all identity grounds formal voices could not and cannot speak for the law, and how simultaneously the people countering that, there are exceptions though. In other words, we're going to use how functional, how hyper invisible, but still discernible, requires contemplation. And it requires us to use time treatments by our fact treatments relative to where, for example, they are employed. Everywhere the species body is standing, already having been used. Simultaneously being used by all formal and informal people right now, simultaneously too fast, too slow to get over on the quality of fact treatment nature necessary to defend where and how relevant is where and how at all locations. For example, the significance of where and how the course of Black pupils / whites of eyes became and stayed abridged. And this self-value, this is where and how it is manifest. The self-value of suburbs that were tactically denatured after Native American and as Native American land. And as nature's identity of systems, identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that. It was applied to systems that, by the breaching method, as systems, in roles with its system, as roles with its system that no one wanted. But everyone took, for example, employments, leaving out the hyper-employment, leaving out how our founders were forced to enter the economy, hiding roles with everyone else, with really trying to get the Constitution unabridged. They had to pretend like everyone else. They were counter-extorted like everyone else. And everyone knew they were in trouble, or they had to be that unity force for themselves. And so, but left entrenched with means for that. The means from since before computers and planes and cars. Nations already have been colonizations members, individually grouped and together as identities, with locations, areas, and states, forcing the individual identities as that to entertain and to self-value. Treats the criminal and citizen's natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, and identity treatments, and time treatments, and collusion as collusions between strangers, where there is maintenance to self-value, logic of each identity of difference. For example, the difference of what each age of fact treatment nature was and is supposed to be paying attention to. Now, what has roles pretending it doesn't realize, which is one of the things to the logic gate. That was the logic gate / gates. That was the program. That was the programming. And only known, told as the computer. But it was really, for example, with this metaphor, programming that is working through, other systems and then through the computer, and with illusion self-valued, with the causes of them, self-valued being and having been blamed on other things, others, ourselves. And that's increasingly self-valued having been, for example, when people deny the significance of the course of Black pupils and whites of lives being abridged, and how every individual increasingly has means to discern this. Every time another individual, they hear them speaking about it through grouped media locations, because they employed the breaching method employed excuses for everyone where it employed natures and identities of pretending others simultaneously as that logic gate that the breaching method employed, if you don't want to call it a hyper criminal enterprise, hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. called hyperarchetypal human fact treatment nature breaching method. Also, proofs of it is what or who would deny this will have simultaneously inherent to, active to, and increasingly progressive to and as the value treatments finite grouped in together. Sequence shifts of value. Other illusions relevant to the denial of the uses of that which is hyper evidential that can only be voiced by listing what is simultaneous, for example. So nature uses lists and arrays, tactical ulterior from how computers use them, because computers, the founding of them, and all justifications and value treatments by them, identity treatments by them, associated with them. They have left out the breaching method that was databases involved. It's uses of um, vertical and horizontal confessions, identity theft, fraud, slander method roles through ourselves. The second you hear about slavery with black and white, and you have black people's white survivors, you know simultaneously your nature was and is hyper native. You don't have that phrase yet. In other words, see those unnatural things that were sustained. Simultaneously, what was being sustained were all positive treatments, all negative treatments by everyone. Increasingly incapable in identity treatments, increasingly capable of defending themselves as fact treatment nature and of affording the short words and or know the nature properly of anyone else at any location, let alone any formal location. And see that more and more made strangers need to hide the same lies together, illusions. And with cases, interbranch, with interbranch treatments of what they call, quote, facts, unquote, quote, truth, unquote. Consciously used to lie, or people pretending it's only about lies. And the hyper invisible, but still discernible, is relevant here. Cases have been, things have, so more and more things are brought in instances treatments and as subject treatments. They are brought effectively to keep wrong outcomes and to keep correct outcomes in cases as collusions with the hyper criminally foreign influence uses of corners of streets, of routes, of corners of buildings, of exception nature tied to that, of vertical and horizontal confessions, of motivations narratives, of all formal and informal evidence reception, data reception. This is inseparable from there are countries individually grouped together with all kinds of physical delusions, nature delusions, and metaphysical delusions per the definition of delusion in the dictionary. And I'm not a doctor. So mental health has had roles with natures and methods of organized crime, with the three branches of government and with their patients and criminals that were sustained, where those identity ground locations since before they were born, every individual grouped in together, tied to them, and each member of their family member, they were employed as needs and natures they knew would need to hide lie progressions and related to uses of those identity of the ground locations, uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive negative treatments, like in phrases treatments, for example, like first responders. First responders are great. Every great thing and every negative thing was and is recorded by a breaching method measured and maintained, but also through our own sickly distinctly, while sickly non-distinctly not discerning, measuring and maintaining for other motivations, natures, needs, interests. Where and how finite they have roles with fact-cheating and wire crime methods that are broadcasting live methods, crime methods. For example, people that are on interbranch locations, campuses, private, who are charged with passions, pretending to be able to speak for emotions and passions and the mind and or morality and or any of the sciences. Honestly enough, to not leave out the smallest finite detail or the significance of it, and to not leave out simultaneously actually recorded and the significance of it, to not leave out where and how that criminally foreign influenced readings of statutes are recorded only capable of being self-valued by the identities of logic as formally standing, relevant to and as the sources of Connecticut news media, for example. It's nothing personal. They got involved and get involved with instances with the police and with political families and with courts already as roles with predicate acts methods. So predicate acts relevant as illusions in databases, some of them charged and some of them not. But even the ones that are charged, the identity ground locations, also how as exception nature type, Connecticut Interbranch uses switching names, for example, where and how they hide and have to hide, recorded remote uses, criminally foreign influenced of their identities, individually grouped and together. Also, as the members of the various natures of the same courts as grouped, of different courts as grouped, and together. And so long, relevant to the sustained part, that is uses of the names and the ages of the family members and those differences of names next to the state judicial branch officers involved on off it with the identity theft, fraud, slander method that has been stayed self-valued through our countries individually grouped and together for how it is relevant the fact roles with the wire crimes, with the Wethersfield police, with a whole bunch of different countries on off Wethersfield campuses and other cities' campuses, interstates, intercities, with the countries from other countries, and how they pretend it's personal. This is what nature is demonstrating and what is actually recorded. They've been fabricating audio and video transcripts with state police families and with FBI families and with CIA families and with fire department families, relevant to their roles, also with medical locations families. All kinds of mental health corruption involved with the identity theft, fraud, slanders, fabricating conversations with people, with criminally foreign influence, remote uses of all investigators originally is one of the things that, for example, Jim Crow laws is about. That's one of the things slavery is about. Denial of the denials of the importance of the simultaneous evidence slash evidences that the existence of witch trials, real or made up, is too, even if made up, because we know to an extent too that was definitely made up, and we know to an extent too the identity of the ground, conjunction, and value was criminally foreign influence collusion against anyone who would pretend it wasn't. It was slavery rules. As a slave, and thanking God, you know, even you know, as a slave, everyone missing how it was employing, not who's going to lie or something like that, and things like that. Already effectively kept the three branches of government, the adults and the children, as a certain type of victim slash hyper victim that already in the past were used with investigators, where they can't go back and be honest, because it shows where and how investigators were juxtaposed with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, with uses of corners of streets, corners of buildings, as roles with interbranch and foreign also, how it kept needing preemptively in the moments, right now actively, and increasingly to hide live progressions, simultaneously different reasons, by exploiting conscious uses of a juxtaposed plethora of distinct natures and methods of organized crime and of abuses of each age of factory nature, where people are going to be anticipated they have to walk, they have to drive, they have to speak about without mentioning it, like corners, like where they were when they heard this, that, they plant things through time, where and how also politics are reported, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with a shell game, where time treatments are hyper evidentially recorded off, preventive. They have defenses of their notions by the importance of the appearance of integrity. In other words, where it was employed, them pretending integrity is incapable of being defended, and of anyone affording simultaneously the use of properly of the short words regarding what our founders hyper communicating to us. We have to discern the difference between communications, verbal communications, nonverbal communications, and hyper communications, because they are simultaneously valued. And they're through systems tactical ulterior. So one of the things we could do is to have this admitted through a cartoon character that the new nuclear holding countries now have right to send forward for the entire species volume to help set logistical and counter logistical safeties and assurances but also conjunctive slash hyperconjunctive um, to development / hyper development plan / hyper plan led by that which is really going to cause positive value, nature, progressions, acts, nature's means out of nowhere, only increasingly. But this won't come through that even entertaining uses of identities, the words as names. It's more than a word of modern countries. But see, now it's a word that can't um, explain history as told. You know, they left out the breaching method that forced because they didn't discern it. They didn't discern how it was being exploited. It is being exploited effectively. So, and the motivations narratives are necessary to be discerned. The news media and leaders of the schools and of everyone, like leaders of the gangs in the schools, their recorded kept needing to hide the same criminally foreign influence uses of their logic and roles with plainclothes police and with the campuses associated with medical corruption, with with healthcare, mental health care involved with judges and prosecutors, criminally with databases, and with where everyone, you know, so that was our, and with what was sustained, where it has that's true there because it was exploited by roles with worse at other locations that everyone has differentially, but differentially increasingly. And this is also relevant to where and how everyone's forced to speak through others. And there is a method by this that is recorded. But see, they switch names into branch, and they were pretend passions and emotions regarding speech they pretended to perceive as hateful. And where they really perceive it hateful, they're leaving out exceptions. Exception nature, what really came first. The FBI has roles recorded consciously. They know to an extent, they don't know the extent of it, but they know to an extent that they have criminally foreign influence uses of Michael Jai White, and that and how he's black, per that which is formerly being and having been in charge of what is legit, how we speak. Again, with the human system, how we are individuals grouped into and species but volume. That science entitled its uses of our words is now through systems abridged, tactical ulterior. All exceptions in exception nature, appearing to demonstrate other, are self-valued uses to keep that pretended. For example, relevant to this. The fifth. So not just America's founders. This is why the suburbs, since before America's founders' parents were even born, were already designed. There had already been sustained a predicate acts, hyper predicate acts delivery system method, and or a hyper, if you will, and or a hyper predicate acts, and or a hyper breaching method, if you want. And if you won't accept that there was a hyper breaching method, a hyperhuman fact cheating nature breaching method, identity theft / fraud / slander method, having been sustained against Native Americans before it was on the books, and right through while it had the books, and the colonization's crooked crooks as the voices of justice. So self-valuing collusion / S with the logic increasingly of a certain type of victim / hyper victim, that the identities of non-sophistication / sophistication and the vice versa simultaneously, where relevant, the hyper invisible but still discernible is functional. This is how the computers work. They tell us lies and call us liars. They leave out exception nature. They leave out the relevance of the ties between the names at the campuses everyone went to. Everyone. Uses of how they tie us together, individually grouped it together. Where relevant, roles with criminally foreign influence uses of databases, since they were kids, were effectively used to keep all distinct identities of 15 identity ground locations where we are for example, I'm jumping around. We are 1/3/5 identity ground location, but where and how this is we are this hyper additionally as ground and ground hyper additionally as us. Always when we are positive unto ourselves per its system. Otherwise, it forces negative value nature progressions, lethal ID. That has nothing to do with life or death. Life and death are bound to the identity of the hyper simultaneous / simultaneous. They're two of the three bodies of life, of time, to life as forever's course. The campus Marcius calls us through the winds of time, of course, vaccines. So it is more probable that the Old Testament and that the Quran wanted us to use yin yang and alpha and omega, decipher of how the sciences became abridged and where and how it has a conjunction to where and how we are manifest as identities of value progression, and how this is more probably and is demonstrably a better way to describe the identity of conjunction that the atom's nucleus, the grouped proton and neutron, identity of relationship to itself, and only increasing value of that, positive or negative or neutral, relative to the parts of the distinct identities of relationship to itself, and they're simultaneously being positive to themselves or negative them to themselves relative to Earth's special difference, relative to where and how the identity of space / existence will stay positive onto all parts of space / existence, but then simultaneously relative to where and to how it has consciousness demonstrated to of its now increasingly not demonstrated to, but increasingly other ways simultaneously demonstrated to it's even easier to discern. All formal and informal takes on logic, on people's motivations and other people's names are recorded effectively being and having been kept criminally foreign influence, identity theft, fraud, slanders, roles with a vertical and horizontal database illusion stacking method consciously applied at other locations effectively having been applied, leading up to the World Trade Center attack context, in that context, and since, leading up to other crazy things that happened, like Sandy Hook, names associated with the campuses at Sandy Hook, leading up to that with Adam Lanza. They had ties to Adam Lanza and to his family too with these games. There are doctors of Adam Lanza, and there are medical community and judges and prosecutors associated with Sandy Hook Promise, also involved with broadcasting and Twitter used criminally, also with people with upskirt nature principle. No, upskirt nature principle ties to other principals with names further involved than now too, and deans and their family members already having been locked to roles with where and how investigators were effectively used to keep overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and insidiousness of people A through Z, with the three branches of government's voices individually grouped and together, self-valued roles with logic and justification by their roles, also with the private tied to them. A whole bunch of people tied to prisons involved with the uses of the locations criminally by the motivations narratives that they can't afford put on paper properly because it would show where and how the people who are the intelligence community today had and have roles criminally for and influenced with illusions that were also coordinated on and off campuses, and where there were recorded uses of that also relevant to where and to how KKK themed and Black themed military families from Connecticut have roles with falsified police reports, have with on-off campuses child offenders, and with various courts of the same natures and of distinct natures, with family members and communications and federal evidences crimes from other cases, and roles with the names at those locations, like a whole bunch of people with a Whiting forensics place and other forensics locations. And Sandy Hook campuses, they have a prison in Sandy Hook. They have the campuses with the kids of each age and nature involved with Connecticut Interbranch, the Wethersfield, in Wethersfield, Connecticut, the state judicial branch offices in here, Wethersfield, Connecticut. Also, where and how George Washington had to leave slavery entrenched, but had to counter extort worse than he had to counter extort with James Madison's plan, our other founders. The people he had to leave with slavery entrenched north and south, but had to force them to do what they couldn't, and then to have to hide behind the America they made until we get done with this, where they left slavery entrenched north and south functional for something that had nothing to do with its outward appearances in conjunction to the exceptions. You know, when there's slavery standing, it has to do with everything. Where shock and awe is sensed in non-sophistication's voices and or in sophistication voices regarding how to respond to Jim Crow laws. See, it's unnatural, but only because, it's Jim Crow laws were put in place, regardless of what the phrase would have been. It was what it's used for, but is by a breaching method to measure and maintain identities of sophistication as the only sophistication that are the voices allowed to even discuss. Honestly, in other words, there is no honesty, but in other words, things like how to counter as fact-driven nature criminal insidiousness, things like criminal insidiousness, things like predicate acts. See, this requires countering simultaneously criminally foreign influence uses of criminally foreign influence uses of readings of the laws, of statutes, of time treatments, that cases originally still with the witch trials, increasing that's logic that needs to hide that at other locations where nature is presenting subjects, answers that all formal and informal increasingly cannot afford. Short words to protract by the revelations inherent, active, and progressive with them. These natures of truth that these others that are used for lies, that are used for to screen lies. They are uses of that are simultaneously uses of logic and of nature, need to pretend motivation, need to self-value means needs to pretend motivations. Oh, it's about money. Self-value that being true as a means to hide the lie. The roles with it, with uses of it, use of other people's names, uses of their own names. Everyone relative to this. You guys can't follow mandated law at any location. You cannot afford the exception nature where the theater is being and having been employed. Care for service people, care for first responders. So then they want to get someone who's a first responder and speak for the group dishonestly. They don't give you the time to demonstrate uses of that. Because all identity ground locations, areas, and states, everywhere the species body is, in some ancient times recorded criminally foreign influence. Look at the suburbs with slavery entrenched north and south since before our founding parents were born, sickly distinctly. That method against the Native Americans sustained, employed that identity they really were. While it was being sustained before our founding parents were even were born, it employed it, recollected as other, only capable of being recollected as other. And as it, not just as the physical Native Americans, as us. That's archaeological evidence. The breaching method against the Native Americans. And how sickly distinctly from how against the colonists, which we know were a part of that, which was, it was not just the colonists against the Native Americans. It was not just Native Americans against Native Americans. It was not just humanity against humanity. It was not just uses of that individually grouped and together. It was uses of all that individually grouped and together, blamed on other things, others, ourselves. And all those differences, opinions, etc., applied, blaming other things, other selves too. Or sensing it and hurting the person who's going to use short words that don't leave out finite details, that don't leave out the value of the order of the finite, that don't leave out the value of the order, the value of truth that came before the order of the finite now, as an identity, as an identity of order, as an only increasing identity of I, what really truthfully unfolded in the past. Begin this class, Boxings. So in other words, there's a means to monetize. You get this computer guy, this cartoon, and you put up you can put up any platform that wants to use it, and just put them up on any platform, and then the character will explain that you guys are gonna that that's the person who's going to communicate for the military itself. And the whole species, we're going to help you take the positions where you can have the security and where you don't have to fight with each other, because we're going to start admitting simultaneously. There have been so many helms for so long, since before everyone was born, that everyone was specifically to have everyone, for example, think that there was a helm when they were teaching with each age of fact, human nature, blaming other things other than ourselves. Where and how? Increasingly, individual, finite, and grouped details and simultaneous values were left out with subject treatments, and where and how they are left out, and the motivations and narratives and the natures regarding that. They can't defend that and put that on paper at the same time. So they value identity of the ground locations, all of them, from off those locations, already being and having been influenced to roles with illusions stacked into databases that are coupled to roles, with that already having been in the past exploited also by illusions posited at locations. So specifically to have it, if any identity at any age of fact, human nature tries to speak about, tries to use the way nature intends us to use, increasingly to use properly the order of the finite, the order of the active, in the order as it is actually progressive, the value. And this is with not just the identity of that is to come, that is already here now, which is why and how we discern, part of the way we discern the progressive there, but distinct from the hyper. Because in other words, I forget what I was doing. The point is, we monetize this, and you guys you're gonna put the money there, and only people who are gonna donate 100% of their programming, and they're just gonna build. That's all it is, the cartoon, and the cartoon with the website. I already put that idea. I didn't get to doing it yet because I'm being delayed from making a living because of my role as an individual, relevant to where every single individual is prevented the finite sickly distinctly, but also by that method that made it sickly non-distinctly self-valued. So we'll discern how it works. It uses parks where everyone lives, uses differences with identity ground locations, corners, all along roads and routes. So it has election crimes in our countries, while it has through the bodies that are the only counters, specifically to keep remote uses of the narratives and natures manifest individually grouped and together, syntactically having been making voice for humanity. As systems tactical terror, then what can afford? Science. Science does not move with theory. For us, it moves by what is force while not. It is the only identity that can be so strong and still be the identity of the value of the order of the finite and the value of the smallest finite detail now left out. Per answer is better than perfect. Recorded. For example, only increasing value is one of the things that the identity of the hypersimultaneous is. So, for example, the theories regarding relativity and regarding how and why the sciences use theory as a word, like for example, music theory as stayed apart from the science it is about properly told. Vaccines old. Older than that thought remembered scientifically as English and as the other modern languages. The 10. First course will end. We will teach again. So there's a problem that no one has been at the helm of the sciences. That's what each country involved in nuclear weapons. And would there be exception? Exception is we're on the verge of nuclear weapons. 2, they're allowed to do this. To have a cartoon character. And you know, they're going to be equal though. In other words, this is about, you guys are going to explain how the sciences moved on theory, moved with identity, not as identity, as voices. And that was exploiting by a breaching method that had already been exploiting everyone doing that without it knowing. So when everyone was doing it, everyone was self-valuing that having been. So increasingly they've self-valued illusions at other places having been, because this method knew how we work, where our identity is distinctly manifest as the grounds, but while not as the grounds, but where the ground is ground, and we are ourselves. But it was also where it is grouped. It is a third, hyper additionally. And all that has 2 other identities of the hyper simultaneous. That is the order and as of truth before, the smallest finite detail now, like modern countries A through Z, individually, grouped and together. See, even the ways we are grouped, it is now tactile ulterior from how and from why. It is more probable and is demonstrable that the ancients used yin yang and alpha and omega together. It is more probable and is demonstrable that the legion of the republic for which we stand and that other countries' equivalents came about at the same time. But when they approached people, it was like to read their dreams. You know, it was their dreams. In other words, it was humanity being led by an as our volume science unabridged with no criminal foreign influences, where every different part of the body, when it's positive onto itself, it's simultaneously positive onto the body's complete identity. Each complete identity of the body's parts has a semi-nature relationship to the complete identity's complete part. This is where semi came from and how semi is manifest with English. There are proofs that they changed victory to colon. So they have the 6 semicolon and the colon when it was victory. and semi-victory. But this is also where and how English is revealed to teach, as ancient languages were revealed to teach, about how the hyper-invisible, but still discernible, is functional as a system, as the system, the only hyper system. Five distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. So there are ways that we could discern this. So a hyper dictionary can be used to fund this, but we can't use the funds to do things and positive negative value treatments with economies as is. In other words, so unless everyone's on the same page, we conceive this as worse than a war zone at the end of a war, worse than a revolution zone. And everyone's spoke about humanity wrong. Boxing is strong, boxing, but give it rest. I taught best. Well, in other words, I play no games. It only feels like games. Evolution science. But anything that feels like games to these countries, members, to wisdom, would they call only heard as wisdom? They'll tell you it's fake. There's something behind it. All identity grounds, identities were employed to needs and natures, as natures reliant upon illusion at other identity ground locations. Self-value simultaneously natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders against everyone differentially, sickly, distinctly, but increasingly sickly, non-distinctly. Many ways things never got better anywhere. In America, anywhere. And all exceptions, exception nature, are in demonstration of the same thing, and simultaneously with demonstration of how everyone and thing has been using exceptions and exception nature, other than how the process of understanding uses it. I'll sit, fake branches full. I'll stand down. Let who pretends other. Pick one name and sequence, so and stay. Hear many pray. They could say they're sorry. I just need a response. I need to show as evidence who can't respond to me. Connecticut into branch. This is our countries individually grouped together caught here. Whole bunch of countries, not them alone. Overt criminal enterprises, private ones. And they brought the names up. And it goes back. So, but has something to do with their uses of corners of streets. Corner streets near me, too. And the roles with the police forms, in the military, as the names with the courts, and with the overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and medical families, people tied to databases, with fact human nature oriented predicate acts, wrongdoing, differentially to roles, needs, and natures. Brought up. They've been fabricating audio and video and telling people to say they don't understand others. Then they stack more names, more families, therefore, more locations, note, therefore, more groups, note, therefore, more group think, note, therefore. Manifest. Okay, thank you. In other words, all you have to do is say that one sentence and prepare to and set up that account. And the interface will be the cartoon. See, I'm sharing my ideas. Most people keep this stuff secret. I mean, we'll get to why everyone keeps things. Everyone's fake. What they keep secret, what they want. Privacy. The word privacy, the value of privacy. It was his recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with effective methods of making time treatments criminally foreign influenced at interbranch locations at private ones as collusion/s with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and all that really involved with the identity of the ground features everywhere. It's the same ancient times. Control your minds, vaccines, but for your hearts, or through your arts. Science is sharing identity, all exceptions, exception nature. They demonstrate also with Earth's a special difference how the identity that is everything at once and that has been and that will come, how it uses exceptions, exception nature, distinctly from everything else. So we can see how we use that distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously. Are three natures bound? And the extent of that. Yeah, boxing. I teach us things, but long. So you get an account. You set the background up as a cartoon. You have this cartoon say, admit, we're in trouble. No one has been at the helm of reason. Another has been pretended. And that was all had, and the more and more that is happening, the more and more these are voices, natures, as victims forced to self-value that only having been remembered, pretended in the past. And no one fathomed where and how that was exploited. And already it was too late. On fronts attached to all the subjects' treatment, too, as roles, not wanted, but as roles, and shown too late. Shown needs to hide that, means to discern, needs to self-value, means to. We have means to answer all our questions. How to cause evolution, fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere, everywhere at once, instantly. We know those answers. What is in the way with theory and with passions and emotions, treatments, with uses of other people's names, individually grouped and together too. And then the groupthink locks in. Care about your family members. Well, that's the truth you'll use for lies. Using your family members more and more. Then you force other people to use the names of their family members and you hide the sequence shifts. The interbranch has been attaching family members to fake words with each other and with others to hide their roles, recorded with the news media, lying about the outcome of cases in the past and lying about, lying as roles with their patients and criminals before they got caught, with other natures and methods of federal rules of evidences crimes, child abuse crimes, uses of elderly homes everyone missed because it's tied to criminally foreign influence uses of probate courts and of superior courts, district courts, and the other natures of courts, individually grouped and together, and on off the state judicial branch offices in each age of each of the three branches of government's kids, simultaneously with the overt criminal enterprises and private ones kept needing to hide the same finite active progressive lies. Uses of the identity of the grounds, identity of conjunction to itself, where the border has been manifest with our country's news locations involved criminally at interstate levels with intercities and intercampuses and intra-campuses, relevant federal crime, predicate act methods, and offensively preventing mandated law methods that effectively have recorded simultaneous needs by people to be pretending care for first responders and service people, and as means to pretend they don't like or sense something other people be being rude about that. For example, while they're needing to prevent people from speaking about what is true always, not denying the slightest exceptions, not violating deny, not like sequence shifts. So Connecticut Interbranch has been switching and forging names, roles with ones at Sandy Hook campuses, and tied to Adam Lanza and to the medical community associated with him, and with the victims and his of him, and of the investigators, and the respondents to it, sickly distinctly. Also, there is an Alex Jones. On one of the social medias, I asked for help too, because WFSB, with the Roger Suzanne and other investigators and judges and prosecutors, he has roles with federal and state police, Wethersfield Police, other cities police, Rock Hill Police, Newington Police, families involved with him with federal crimes on off kids' houses and along the spots where they live through time, involved with a principal child offender and more I caught then and now. He attached me to fake conversations with themselves, attached me and my family to fake conversations with themselves and with investigators that lied about the outcome of past cases and fake conversations with me and them about that. And that's recorded. And they sickly distinctly they did that too. So they forced people to speak as groups, including as families, not realizing, so they could play games where they leave out finite details and they use truths for lies. And they ask, like they do a little magic tricks to ask people truths about things that they had fake conversations with people about before that, investigators. And then they're talking about something that's not even real. They make pretend they misunderstand things. This is relevant to the use of the crime methods consciously, criminally, of putting charges on falsified police reports, but no writing. Where and how relevant, evidentially relevant, is where and how overt criminal enterprises, plural, private ones, and insidiousness of people A through Z have roles with the names that I never even saw around my campuses. We're in the background now as adults and when they were back then, sickly distinctly pretending other, as those relevant with the names associated with the corner of Carriage Hill Drive and at the corner of Carriage Hill Drive and Fairlane Drive, involved with a Joshua Stryker, a whole bunch of people tied to a Joshua Stryker, involved with home break-ins, intercities, involved with judges and prosecutors and foreign and domestic military, a whole bunch of their roles with a whole bunch of other countries, with identity theft, fraud, slanders, putting little fake communications with people, fake ties to them, fake natures of ties to people tied to them are pretended simultaneously. Individually, there's a Jeremy Grohl who reported, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed judges and prosecutors criminally involved with him having broken into my car near the corner of one of the corners near the Wethersfield High School, which is also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with medical families through time that had roles with the kids on medical relationships with them, and then just with their kids, through their kids, but with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and their roles with plainclothes police, investigators used criminally for an influence, roles with the names at prisons. There's a prison in Sandy Hook that is involved also with the other natures and fire campuses and children campuses. The whole system's uses and roles and needs and natures are relevant. The people are pretending passions and emotions distinctly on CNN, from on Fox News, and from on MSNBC. And they pretend it's personal, as for example, as a predicate acts method, if you mention that, because they know that they are leaving out finite details, the significance of the order of finite details, the significance of being distinct from that but value too simultaneously, for example, and etc. So we're in a semi-ancient trap. Suits and ties and the counters are proofs. We're shock and awe, and influenced to rolls with it, tricked, forced, or persuaded to rolls with it by the Bridgie method that knew that everyone would seek any same way they could to make positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, even though all the means to that are self-possessed, as one are hyper-possessed too, as criminal insidiousness natures of means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures. As systems, tactical ulterior, from where and from how. We're supposed to get the Constitution unabridged and hyper native pure. That's what's communicated to us by our founders. See, Chief, see how they would have never been able to counter extort our other founders and everyone else. They had to counter extort to an extent they could. They had to rely on, the resistance of the Native Americans, which was also through themselves. While some ways everyone has better means to discern how our syntax has stayed abridged, how the significance of that was it being consciously maintained at all locations apart from the formal locations and grouped relevant ways. All exception nature tied to that. Where the news media speaks for past legal cases and they tell lies. They are involved with those crime scenes, no. And this being with overt criminal enterprises, plural, associated with the people that recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed by Joshua Stryker, I never had a verbal conversation with. He non-verbally confirmed roles with slanders of me, with criminally foreign influenced investigators. They also have roles with shipping locations like UPS and the post office and spots next to these places. Buckley High School and the park there is also involved with mayors involved with the Aiello family and the DeMauro family. Also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with the families with wire crimes, with Wethersfield Pizza, and with on off Yukon, with a Violet family, with doctors and lawyers too, involved with federal crimes with databases, and with interbranch families personally and professionally and privately simultaneously, that having been sustained as names involved with overt criminal enterprise, private one, and a whole bunch of different countries on and off the campuses they've been putting little magic tricks into that are connected. So we need to get them on paper. And this has been through time. They have kids of with the name Moran, Moran. I forgot, but it's with both political parties that recorded as how an exception nature to them treatments that are hyper evidentially proofs here. Now there is a Mr. Emmett who's one of the ones further involved with the principal child offender and more involved, distinct natures of pictures of the kids that interbranch women and men in private tied to them, including medical community, hadn't have roles, including judges and prosecutors with various natures of courts with their family members involved with crimes, with digital crimes and crime methods as the only counters to such. This is why it's relevant where and how. Forgiveness is so we can deal with the sequence truth and what I caught them doing with the prisons, the interbranch and their patients and criminals and against innocents, and relevant to the remote uses of their own innocence. And so motivations, narratives, and stuff like that with time treatments relevant. In other words, Sandy Hook has names involved with forging and switching names. So we have to narrow in on them and get them on paper with the interbranch switching and forging names. Various natures of courts colluded with Bob Chase. And these are also names that with the forensics locations through time. Joshua Julian is one of the ones on Facebook involved with medical communities that are KKK themed and Black themed investigators, involved also with the acting professors in various departments at Central Connecticut State University, involved with recorded conscious criminally foreign influence uses of the departments individually grouped in together at Central, at Trinity College, at UConn, from off the campuses, maintain self-value roles. We're through our roles with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, maintaining exploitation of faith in them. And so this offensively needs self-values, groupthink, for example, and things like 9/11, like January 6th treatments of the state capitol, people rushing the state capitol and crazy like that when in groups. Not to describe the craziness, because the counters of it are crazy too, sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly. And it's measured and maintained by a breaching method, sickly distinctly from our own people for their own reasons. For it, though, additionally, other to screen its method of means to measure and maintain. Worse than criminal incompetence, self-value, where we have words like security manifest. Every word. Where and how we are quality as fact treatment nature is where and how it counts the most. So, and then, take out some ads. I mean, to play some. That's the sentence. I mean, that's the agenda. There's a military guy who's allowed to communicate with us, and he's allowed to admit where and how. Now the rule, if we catch them lying with that, then we get a real person, and we get in other words. We'll figure out a way. The evolution science only feels like game /S, or else to sense. We don't leave out the smallest finite detail against anyone. We have to. The immigrant populations were employed by a breaching method that employed individual grouped in together, self-value uses of words like identity and names. All words. Don't forget, they can't defend that and afford short words proper. So they change people's words. So relevant are recorded. What is actually recorded is Wethersfield police have been roles with other agencies and courts, fabricating audio and video transcripts to replace what's actually recorded over their phones. Because what they're in the backgrounds talking about, what their motivations were regarding their behavior towards me and their descriptions of my behavior, they're hiding what came before that. They have, see, one of the things they have roles with our countries individually grouped together is behavior racketeering. And they have all kinds of psychiatry racketeering that has been progressed. So, so sociology, social psychology, they have the hierarchies of thought, and they have the lowerarchies, sickly distinctly, differentially criminally foreign influence, where everyone doesn't want to be criminally foreign influence, but increasingly exceptions are made for them. And the reason that state is relevant to where I caught them doing communicating. Awareness, communicated was his awareness that they first demonstrate consciously through little kids and adults in collusions that they are criminal. There is conscious criminally foreign influence abuses of fact treatment nature and time treatments, identity treatments, instances relative to instances treatments that come after this and that come with it. They're doing little magic tricks and databases at different locations. And the motivations for that came from before that, from other locations, mixed within the identities of those locations' motivations and or apparent ones. And the real ones are mixed with additional ones, which is not complicated, but they pretend that's complicated. People since founding, because of the breaching method. And where it's simple, where it is complicated, they pretend it's simple simultaneously. The simultaneous being lied about, hyper-simultaneous being lied about, because it's all has been known. Because all that would be defended, the breaching method, no. So we're not supposed to agree about the name of the devil, but we're supposed to agree, but we are supposed to agree and discern that a predicate, hyper predicate acts delivery system method had already taken possession of where and how actually we are bound, individual groups together, where and how actually, and why actually we're black pupils, whites of eyes, and exception nature are bound. The identity of space as existence answers all our questions. The Quran directs love for people who agree to use the name Allah for the identity of the hyper simultaneous, which shows, in other words, per the method of observation of its significance, and with the delineation of ratiocination from pseudo-ratiocination. And again, where and how. Hyper-exception nature uses exception nature distinctly from, but also non-distinctly from exception nature. So we cannot invent what is true always and only increasingly value. But it is right there to use for science/s. It is the identity, all parts of the parabola share. It's nature. All natures of conjunction to it. To the sciences, individually grouped and bound. I'll gather round vaccines. I teach you things belong. So all you have to do, all you always have the rights to do, is have a little cartoon guy and have him say, or her. You can have him or her, or both. And you could have them say, communicate, admit with the individuals as can't, because then they can't, they don't know how to handle the questions. They don't handle the other natures of significance. Again, too, where it uses words like value, significance, identity, tactical. I mean, other than these systems' tactical ulterior from its own. Vaccines. Vaccines to lift what box, to gain what shape. So circle does, or else it senses, knows. It's the wrong nature of positive. There's a difference between making positive value nature progression, acts and natures that are not criminal insidiousness, and making positive value nature progressions, acts and natures that are criminal insidiousness. Natures like wrongdoers, acts like predicate acts, natures like wrongdoing itself, humanity. A 10 through volumes each, the hypervolume, Lord, is best. Discern to see. 'Twill set you free. Pantheism is another thing we could do. And I'll donate the order of it. I mean, the order of it is set by the order of the identity that bound 5 distinct identities of order. And the value of those orders, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, in demonstration of its distinct, non-distinct, hyposimultaneous identity of relationship to itself as volume, and how only increasing. So this is about hyper generation per the extent we could discern, and where and how that is denied, inherent, active, and progressive, to the logic that denies it, formal and other too, no, are proofs of it too. But such proofs have been denied and gotten away with because how they inverted that per relative. I mean, relatively, which is relative to where and how they have each age of campus recorded consciously, used to maintain cover-ups from the past, preemptively and actively, of criminal insidiousness natures, of positive treatments, negative treatments, and identity treatments, and effectively, methodically, how this is to maintain motivations, plural, by a singular motivation, juxtaposed with everyone else's motivations. Complete, better than perfect, criminally foreign influenced remote possession of the syntax natures you've heard since you were your kids, humanity. When Legion first approached others, it was more probably as Legion / tribe consciously as a hyper additional aspect to humanity, knowingly that and how the hyper additional is unto itself the cause of evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. It was approaching humanity as if it was approaching itself with means out of nowhere, evolution's fruits and gifts out of nowhere. And by and as a system that was not exploiting, leaving out the smallest finite detail, or how nature would demonstrate when exceptions were made. It's an increasingly perfect system by because of where and how it is capable of being our republic, other exceptions exception nature, as modern countries, better than perfect, only increasing. So our identity is value, where value is nature slash nature is value. It is like the identities of our body. With the cells we had, they went away. But their identity remains. And they remain a positive and or negative and negative simultaneously to ourselves. And each identity has an identity to relationship to what is positive and to negative simultaneously. And that is also how each identity is grouped: locations, areas, ages, sexes. And this is with the electrical engineering. And again, as identity grounds, how hyper additionally, and with the group between that, the trinity between that, and not where and how what is everything while it demonstrates it is the only thing that surges to all things. Vaccines. It surges to all things while them and even force, whichever course it takes. Campus Mars see us through the wind, calls to our souls, partakes. So someone please respond for the branches of government and for the exceptions and exception nature tied to the nuclear holding nations and the ones on the verge of it. Because all this time, where theory stands, we're clapped our hands. Where boos and anger voiced. All remains inverted, fake, and pseudo Joyce. I mean, not Joyce. I should say Joyce. God bless you, Joyce. People named Joyce. Everyone named Joyce. Just I like to rap boxing. So you get this guy, you tell him, and or girl, cartoon character. And you keep it honest. No one was at the helm of sciences. They were pretending other, so self-valuing where and how theory had been presented to be presented. Here. Through means so hyperclear. The way slash ways appear. And so we're going to embrace the nations hurt most, or most manifest. Nature is demonstrating physical identity of value progressions, where how also it wants us to discern the identity that is the same one, where there are, where that difference has nothing to do with it. Where relevant is where our identities were applied through filters. Again, that's relevant where and how we make value treatments regarding the significance of how Native American rights, not only were they distinctly hurt in the past, before our founders were even born, during that time and since. But that identity, as a part with history, there was uses of that applied that had nothing to do with any of the motivations of people A through Z who used / use it with their logic. Simultaneously, while using and having used, the other applications of their identity, now their identity now further in layers You guys are incapable of speaking about the identities that came before. Our founders' parents were even born when their parents were born and when they were born. You guys are incapable of speaking about our founders honestly, let alone about Native Americans. Fear ye. Hear ye each or one. There is one way alone boxing is fun. Besides shadow boxing. That's one way. It generates others. Wow. By what means? Attend. The skies will be our course as our ground. To show it then.